What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Crimson Desert, upcoming action-adventure from Pearl Abyss that is set to release towards the end of March 19th. But as we are slowly getting closer to that release date and marketing began to ramp up for the title, it occurred to me that, truth be told, I didn't have a good baseline for what to expect from this game. If you watch the channel a lot, you may well have heard me prior to this talk about expectations a fair bit and how that can sort of influence what you get out of a game. And with this game in particular, while every time I had seen it in various previews and trailers and stuff, it looked especially flashy and cool, but I would be lying if I said I had a good idea of what the game was actually about. But as I mentioned, the marketing has been ramping up, and so I decided to sit down and just take a little while to go through all of that and actually try to understand what I was looking at properly, as some of it was pretty wild, and I was a little concerned then about if they could actually pull it off. And while I still have a little bit of that concern, it's actually kind of shifted into different areas. And so I want to sort of set the tone of this video by just beginning there and getting it out of the way. After going through all of this, my main concern with this game going into it is probably going to be whether or not the mishmash of all the different stuff they are doing actually feels cohesive in game. And two, a lot of focus is being put specifically on the combat and movement systems, and this is supposed to be a big open world, and I'm curious how much depth to that world will actually exist. And those are things I'll simply have to wait to actually play the game and get into. Otherwise, though, let's go ahead and get into this. As I mentioned, this is an open world action adventure. That's important because what is reinforced by everything I've seen here is that this isn't like a super sweaty RPG with tons of numbers and mechanics. Most of it, including gear and skill progression, all looks relatively straightforward like you would expect from an action adventure, even if you can do a lot of crazy stuff with it in combat. To that end, this game was originally announced back in 2019, I believe, so it's been in production for quite some time, and it is using their own proprietary engine, which they have specifically referenced as being one of the reasons they can actually do some of this stuff. But otherwise, this game is going to see you primarily playing as a character named Cliff, who is a member of a faction known as the Greymanes. Now, strangely, it would seem that the main story does in fact follow Cliff for the most part. However, via progression through that story, you're going to get access to two other characters you can play as. I don't have their names, but one looks to be a woman, and the other one seems to be a different race entirely. And you'll be able to freely explore as those two characters, and that is important because they have different weapons and setups than Cliff does. So with that in mind, there is no proper character creation here, and you'll be playing one of those three, it would seem, most of the time. But I mentioned you are a member of the Greymane faction. This is what actually kicks off the story. Your faction is attacked by a separate faction known as the Black Bears via an ambush. This ambush basically scatters your faction to the winds, several of them being pretty much dead. You in particular get hurt and cast off into a river like a few others, though you ultimately live, and much of the story revolves around that revenge story. But that's not where it ends, that's simply where it begins, because in pushing back and trying to get said revenge, you eventually uncover a larger plot revolving around the artifacts from the Abyss Realm. The Abyss Realm is something you'll discover as a different realm, if you would believe it, but these artifacts that come from there grant people all of these crazy powers, and I will say the transitional, loading screens, I guess, between each individual area does give the impression of something really high-tech going on with the Abyss Realm, but these artifacts are going to empower and provide you with different abilities, which is one of the key progression points. But the Abyss is going to be interacting with your world known as Pywell. Pywell looks to be quite large, separated into 5 different regions, with all sorts of towns and biomes therein. One of them is quite literally named Crimson Desert, which I suppose is where we get the title from. And it must be said, the place looks gorgeous. I am not so sure about what it is going to have in terms of, again, depth and how much, systems will be running in the background to make it feel like a sandbox, or is it more static than that kind of thing. But we do have a small answer to some of those questions, because there's going to be resource gathering, various activities you can do, like observing people mid-activity to learn things from them. Apparently that's how you're going to learn how to fish, as an example. There also looks to be a day-night cycle, but I would say, in a lot of ways, what excites me the most about everything they've shown off thus far is actually the movement and traversal elements, because it looks like they've done a lot there. So moving your way through the story, you'll get access to a glider known as Crow Wings, which allow you to spot this sort of crow-shaped hood thing that will, of course, allow you to glide, but that's hardly the only way to get around. You'll have various mounts. There's a big mech you can get inside of that can shoot missiles, which is one of the reasons I said, again, it kind of seems like a mishmash of different art styles and styles in general, so there is that. Other mounts include like a giant bear, regular old horses, a dragon at one point even. But that's, how to like physically get around. But even within combat terms, it looks to be a lot of movement related abilities. Like we see one instance of them like doing pole vaulting in one of the trailers. There's also all sorts of abilities that move you around the battlefield a great deal. But speaking of the battlefield, this is another part of the game that feels especially interesting to me because you're going to be getting involved in a lot of both small and large scale battles. Small scale stuff can be just you against a couple other people, or maybe a mini boss or a proper boss fight against someone big. Now those fights, the boss fights in particular, do seem to have certain elements of it that are like a little more scripted than the regular bits of combat, and you can see this with the occasional like quick time event. But it does look to be that most of the time you'll be in full control of all of these things, and that's important because another aspect of this seems to be destructible environments. We see a lot of footage of them just destroying all sorts of stuff, large towers, walls, that kind of thing, and I'm curious what the exact limits of a system like that would be. And while they also show you maneuvering your way around those elements, it's also made very clear that you can like fully climb up and down things as another method of potential traversal if you need to go up rather than across, as an example. A few other things of note that I was able to glean from all of this, however, is that the main story itself is, at least from what they've explained, seemingly relatively linear, but you're going to be free to take on all sorts of side quests, which they have described as both small or more grand endeavors. From one of their more recent showcases, they show off, like for instance, being able to liberate certain areas from other factions, such as various bandits. This looks to be like just a simple bandit clearing mechanic, where after you do that, the original faction owners of the place come back. But they also mention more involved stuff like proper sieges, or simply getting involved in the usual local drama. But again, exactly how far that goes without playing it for ourselves is hard to say, but all of it will aid progression in some way, if nothing else, for just the accrual of resources. But another aspect of progression are the Abyss artifacts. These are another thing you'll be able to find out in the open world, and finding them gives you access to your progression, being able to do things like upgrade your base stats, health, stamina, that kind of thing, or acquire new skills, which come in all shapes and sizes, from various grapple mechanics or things more suited to a particular playstyle, like for instance one of your various weapon types, etc. That brings us to an interesting point, however, though, the equipment side of that. Now, I mentioned this game doesn't seem to, from everything I've seen, to have like big heavy stats you have to figure out and get to the bottom of in order to be effective here. Most of it actually seems relatively simple. Items you buy seem to have base stats and things like attack speed, a general defense stat, or like a crit chance as an example. And the better the equipment gets, the better those stats are, and then you can also take them to a place like a blacksmith and have them upgraded as well. And there also seems to be some method of enchanting that allows you to add extra effects to these items on top of even that. So there are things, of course, like various types of weaponry that you'll equip, different types of armor, that sort of stuff. And it does look like there's a baseline level of quality there, but it can be upgraded and changed a bit. And most of your stats seem to derive from that specifically, with the rest of it coming from your skills and stuff, and then applying those strategies within combat to perform the way you want to. Which is one of the many reasons I think that, again, this is more of an action adventure than like a super deep mechanical RPG. And most of the focus seems to simply be on having a lot of fun with combat and movement in particular, from everything I have seen thus far. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it looks cool as hell, to be clear. Especially the little snippets of like you fighting large bosses in the sky as like mechanical dragons, or this like sort of mechanical bird thing that's flying around, which seems to have people around it as well that you seem to have to take out. And all told, putting all of that together, that seemed to be the most important stuff from everything I had seen looking into this game. Now the crazy part of this is just how over the top all of it seems to look, which is why I want to circle back to some of those concerns that I started this video with. So all of this, again, looks really cool. But as you probably saw throughout some of the footage here, there's just a lot going on in terms of like pushing stuff together, in terms of art style and different styles in general. And while that's not necessarily a problem, depending on how it all pans out, I am wondering if there does wind up feeling like a cohesive vision here, as the jump from like two seemingly tribalistic factions being like the head of the main story and then suddenly you're in a mech shooting missiles at things just seems a little bit odd. However, again, all of it in motion might not be a problem. On the flip side of that, there's also the depth of the world. Most of the things I saw them doing in the world, or that they even described, either seemed like basic open world mechanics, kind of made to look a little more flashy, like liberating things from bandit camps, that type of stuff, gathering up resources, which then aids progression, that kind of thing. And I'm simply curious just how much will be out there to find organically in the world. Like, how does this game handle NPCs, crowds? Are all of them like static, or are they just kind of like pop in and out as you might expect from something attempting to be more of a simulacrum of a functioning city, that kind of thing. So all told, walking away from a deep dive into a lot of this stuff, I will say that I do feel like I have a much better picture of what this game is trying to be, even if I still clearly have some questions left that I think only actually winding up reviewing the game will answer for me. But for today, I think that's going to do it. With any luck, you got some use out of this video. Again, I assume if I was having trouble parsing it all together, there's likely at least a few other people out there who weren't entirely sure about this game either, but by all means, let me know how you feel about all of this down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.